Thank you. So this image will hopefully be familiar to some of you if you were involved in the place plan process previously. The structure that we'd like to propose for this evening is, I think, welcome and introductions we've pretty much done. So my name's Holly Lewis, I'm a partner at We Made That, and we've been leading the team on this piece of work. We're working alongside transport consultants, Steer, who worked on the previous work, and now with civic engineers to look at more detail in the proposals that that are on the table at the moment. We're also working with PRD, who are socioeconomic consultants and property consultants, and we'll be helping with that submission to the Levelling Up Fund that's already been mentioned by Councillor Monk, and with Stockdale, who are cost consultants, who are helping us to make sure that we have a good understanding of the money that sits alongside the proposals that we're going to look at today. What we'd like to do is start with just a very quick recap of what was included in the place plan. As I said, some of you hopefully will be familiar with that. And then a reminder of the engagement that's taken place so far in this process. We're obviously still, carrying on with that. And then the core of what we'd really like to talk about is a review of the priority projects that were identified from the place plan that we've been asked to take forward. And just to reflect back to you all that as we head towards this Levelling Up Fund submission, which, as has been discussed, is at the beginning of July, we will need to focus down on what are the priority projects. So we're really keen to hear from you all this evening, any comments or queries about those projects, but also where your priorities lie. And that's something that we've been discussing out in the town centre as well recently, and that there's an online survey also to allow people to feed back to who weren't able to attend either of those. And then we have a general kind of set of questions, sort of time for questions at the end. So we should be hour and a half is what we're aiming for. I think we'll keep to that time. So this is just a brief diagram which doesn't describe the entirety of our process, but just to mention that we're sort of around about halfway through the work that we've been asked to look at by the council most recently. Our process so far has involved lots of more targeted meetings and discussions with specific stakeholders and groups that expressed interest in the proposals through the place plan process. We're now in, as you can see, this process of engagement with the wider public and wider residents and businesses of Folkestone. And that sits alongside the project programme that you can see at the bottom there. So the first thing that we did was develop action plans for the 6 projects, which is what are the next practical steps in terms of taking these things forward. We've been developing those projects in a bit more detail, and we're now in the process of making the selection of what should be included in that Levelling Up Fund submission. Following that, we will be working up the projects in more detail and putting together the application with the council. A reminder of what was included in the place plan, and this is just a very headline. It was structured under a grand challenge and then these 6 missions. So the grand challenge that was defined through the place plan progress was to overcome decline in the town centre by embracing opportunity, addressing the climate emergency, celebrating what's already great, and bringing the town's communities together. And this is what we heard from conversation with yourselves and through multiple meetings. The missions, just to take them through one at a time, firstly, celebrate what's great. This is about acknowledging, first of all, that Folkestone has so many assets. The coast is fantastic, you've got fantastic heritage, a brilliant creative economy, lots of very exciting things going on, and that investment in that and supporting that is incredibly important to the future success of the town centre. Mission 2 is a town centre for the future, and this is recognising that there have been some challenges in the town centre, that vacancy is an issue, the impacts of COVID have obviously been significant, and that action is required in order to address that. Mission 3 is a place for all voices. This is, I think, responding to some of the challenges I think we had through the place plan process, that not enough people are spoken to, that there's a sense that regeneration in Folkestone is done to people rather than with them. And this mission is targeted at trying to address that, not just through continuing to engage as we develop our work, but in saying that the structures around anything that's delivered in Folkestone needs to be embedded in local engagement. Mission 4 is moving sustainably, and obviously the climate crisis is a significant challenge for us all, and equally in Folkestone. and that actually the way that we move around Folkestone is perhaps one of the bigger things that could be addressed. There's a big dependence on cars for short journeys, is what the evidence tells us. And so there's a support for walking and cycling, particularly through this mission. Access to opportunity is particularly about employment and skills, recognising that there are some long-term and ingrained challenges of deprivation, particularly within the communities of East Folkestone, and trying to make sure that the opportunity of regenerating the town centre is available to all. And finally, mission 6 is deliver sustainable quality. There are a number of kind of suggested actions underneath that, but making sure that what we're delivering is on a par with the greatness of what Folkestone already has, so that we're not delivering at a lowest common denominator, that what's being delivered through our programmes by the council, but also by private sector investors, is of top quality as befits Folkestone. Just a recap of the engagement that took place through the place plan. So we had 17 different public workshops and webinars. I think we were really in the thick of lockdown at that time, so those were online. 150 survey responses and email responses, 167 detailed conversations, 266 people attended public webinar events, and those recordings have been viewed nearly 460 times, and a contact list of 645 individuals, all of whom have been shared the information about what's happening this evening and the opportunity for the survey that's also online. And then I mentioned that we had our first public event in the Bouverie Business Centre last week, at which we had just under 50 attendees. So that was quite a useful opportunity to talk through in more detail and have that kind of face-to-face dialogue and conversation. But just to reiterate that we have also been progressing with those more targeted workshops, but also one-to-one and individual conversations to make sure that as many people as possible who have been involved previously in the work are helping to shape it going forward. So the core of what we've been asked to look at more recently, and the core of our consideration as we head towards a Levelling Up Fund submission, are these 6 projects, of which we will go through in more detail, but just to give a sort of an overview of what those are. So project number 1, the station arrival and connections to the town centre, which you can just see up here. Project number 2, an improved gateway to the town centre, which for us at the moment in the proposals includes a reconfigured bus station layout. Sandgate Road and the town centre public realm, which includes Falker at one end here, all of the pedestrianised area of Sandgate Road and Guildhall Street South. The area around F51 and Payers Park being incredibly important in terms of particularly connecting the 2 sides of the town. The Harbour Line and Tram Road, and proposals around Sunny Sands. And what we propose to do this evening is to just take those through in pairs, 2 at a time, to explain the thinking as was included in the place plan and a bit of the evolution of the thinking since then, to take any comments or questions around those. It does mean that I'll have to maybe move us on. If there's a longer conversation, we'll have to pick that up separately, because I want to make sure that we get across all 6 projects, and I hope that you'll appreciate that in the time that we have available. So our key questions for this evening are: what do you think that the top priority project should be that we should be seeking funding for? And do you have any specific thoughts or concerns around any of the projects that we're showing? And we're really keen to make sure that we're hearing that from you now, so that we can address or respond to those comments as proposals are developed in more detail. So project number 1, the station arrival and connections to the town centre. So this really responds to a lot of the feedback that we had from all kinds of stakeholders, really, about how your arrival at the station or departure from the station, if you're a resident moving outwards, could be much more positive than it is at the moment, with the kind of environment of station approach and the immediate road network around the station. So here we've included in the key here some proposals which are coming forward already, but would be part of the overall package of change. So number 1 here, the community garden at the Disused platform. We're aware that this is something that is being progressed separately with South Eastern, but we think could contribute to this overall picture of change here. Number 2, improved pedestrian space outside the station. So station approach, whilst it accommodates traffic in and out of the car park and taxis and drop off and and pickup is nonetheless quite wide for what it currently accommodates, and the station building also perhaps could do with a little love. So here, a budget allocation to improve that pedestrian space to really make sure that when you arrive in Folkestone, you feel positive about where you've come to. Number 3, a mobility hub by the station with the potential to include cycle hire or electric cycles. And we know that Southeastern are progressing their own proposals for a secure cycle hub in some of the space within the station. But it would be great to encourage visitors to Folkestone to come off the train and perhaps get onto cycles, probably electric cycles if they're going to be tackling some of your hills. That could be a good way of encouraging people to travel by more sustainable means as visitors. Number 4, a secure cycle storage facility, which, as I said, is already being progressed with Southeastern. Number 5, wayfinding at strategic junctions, and that's down here. So we've heard, for example, from a workshop or in a workshop from the church that people come in and just knock on their door weekly saying, how do I get to the town centre? And I don't think that's so surprising, actually, once you've been in the environment to understand that it's quite challenging to navigate. So whether that's specific signage or whether it's reconfiguring of the public realm to encourage you to travel in certain directions and give a clearer sense of, okay, I know where I'm heading, that seems something that's important to consider. Number 7, we've called an overhaul of the legacy highway system. So Cheriton Gardens and Cheriton Road, we're interested in the potential of introducing all directions travel, so two-way working. We appreciate that that's already the case at this end of Cheriton Road, but further in to the town centre. And then number 8 is something that's come up a few times. We're really interested to hear what the appropriate sort of manifestation of that might be. So recognising that people are going to come from all over the country, I think, to visit F51, the new skate park. How do they get from the station to the skate park, likely on skateboards? What's the appropriate route for that? And how do we make sure that that's clear for them, but also not disruptive to residents? So one of the suggestions has been whether a sort of more designated skate route could be implemented along Broadmead Road and potentially through the Ship Street site, the gasworks that we know that the council are taking forward as well. So there's a link there, I think, between the station, council activity, F51, and potentially back into the town centre that needs to be considered. And this consideration of how all the parts of the city, of the town, link together is incredibly important, I think. So just a few images which actually were included in the place plan about what potentially that could look like, just examples from elsewhere. So introducing things like rain gardens and greenery alongside the carriageway with protected cycleways, potentially new signage. We've mentioned a cycle hub at the station. That could be interesting to think about the sort of how that could appear. And then this is what we were told previously. I appreciate that the total numbers for this survey, this is from the place plan engagement, the total numbers of respondents were comparatively low. And this is why we think it's worth asking the question again about how strongly these proposals are supported and the sort of priorities between the 6 projects that are on the table. But I think across the 6 projects, and you'll see as we go through, we have this repeated for each of them. This is probably the one with more mixed responses. So the majority here sort of neither particularly agreeing nor disagreeing, and with a relatively even balance, although slightly tipped towards agreement with the proposals. But I think we are keen, as I said, the total numbers here that you can see outside the brackets are relatively low. So we're really keen to keep asking these questions and gaining feedback on the proposals as they stand. I'm going to take one more project number 2, and then stop for just some questions on those 2. So the second kind of project or grouping of projects is improved gateway to the town centre and to Bouverie Square. The biggest move here, and I'll talk through the key as well, but the biggest move here is the proposal that it would be possible to reconfigure the bus station so that the bus stops and stands sit along Middleburg Square and potentially a little bit along Shellen Street, to allow the current bus station site to be a new public square for the town. So that would involve, at number 1, a redesign of the road layout to allow all modes of transport to pass along Middleburg Square. Number 2, as I've said, a new bus station layout. So all of the bus stops we think can be accommodated along Middleburg Square. And as I said, potentially in a layout that goes a little bit along Shellen Street. So still compact and kind of easy to move between your bus stops, but this big benefit of freeing up this huge space, which actually doesn't, there's a number of technical challenges around the way that works as a bus station at the moment, including the need for buses to reverse, for example. At number 3, that would potentially allow repurposing of the bus station building. We would have to relocate the driver facilities, but that's a fantastic historic building, which I believe was a pavilion for tennis courts historically, and could be a real asset to this potential new square. At number 4, reinstating Bovary Square as an arrival space and a focal point for the town centre. So there is a sense that there isn't this sort of celebration of Folkestone, a place to spend time, to dwell, to appreciate the kind of historic environment of the town centre. And that actually we know that generally speaking, town centres are, the way that people use town centres is trending towards being a nice place to spend time rather than just the sort of function of shopping. So that's why we think that this could be a really big and important transformation of the town centre. At number 5, there will be opportunity to introduce greening, and we've suggested rain gardens and sustainable drainage as part of that at number 5. At number 6, the potential for another mobility hub, and again a sort of cycle hire hub that could form part of a network. Obviously we've spoken about one at the station already. At number 7, play equipment, so the opportunity to make the town centre a more family friendly environment, to encourage people with families to come and spend their days. At number 8, we see that there is potential for a new building to be accommodated here at the eastern edge of the square. Certainly there would be space. And at number 9, which is sort of off the top of the drawing here, so we include a little window, that the reconfiguration of the transport network, and this, I mentioned the relocation of bus stops, could include reconfiguration of the highway along Shellen Street. And one of the things that we've been talking about often and could, I think, be really important in terms of connecting the town almost back together, would be the connection across Shellen Street between the two sides of Guildhall Street, which I think would be, I mean, it's such a challenging connection at the moment, would be, I think, again, quite transformative for those communities affected by that sort of severance that's caused at the moment. So again, just some images of what kind of thing that might be like. We can imagine that that potential for introducing greenery in the reconfigured Bovary Square could be something like this. We could be trees and could be full of plants, and a really fantastic and wonderful place to sit. We recognise, though, that there's a need to accommodate highways and traffic movement and transport. And this example in Barcelona, I think, does a really good job of having quite a busy, difficult road, but green space alongside it. Recognising that there's potential, obviously the Saga building is not used in the way that it was, so we see that there's proposals for development to come forward on that site, and thinking about how new development there could contribute to and kind of support a positive public space at the bottom, alongside refurbishment of existing assets such as the bus station building, and then new bus stops and stands with new shelters. Just some examples here from Rotterdam. This is not saying that this is the design, but an idea that that could be something that is, again, supporting this really high quality environment here. And then in terms of what we heard previously, you'll see that there's a stronger weighting towards agreeing with the proposals for this package of works, still with some disagreeing or strongly disagreeing, but definitely a stronger weighting, although, to be fair, not strongly agreeing with the proposals. So with that, I will just pause here and take a moment to look at the Q&A. Gillian, thank you for your question, although if it's around Payers Park, I'm going to leave it, I think, until we come to the next package of projects. Liz Tullock says, good idea improving pedestrian, cycle and public transport access at Folkestone Central. Can we not go further and exclude cars completely from the main pedestrian routes from the station? I think this is interesting. But I think Mark Rain sort of sums up the quandary that we have, which is there is a sense that, and John says no, thanks John, a sense that overall the road network around Folkestone Town Centre was designed for the port and harbour operations, which are no longer functioning in the way in which those roads were designed. So there is a sense of overcapacity in that road network, and a sense that there's therefore a balance perhaps too much towards serving cars and not enough towards supporting other forms of transport. I think it is a shame to present those things as being completely oppositional to each other. It's possible to have a road network that works well for cars and that also works well for pedestrians and cycles. But we would argue, and I think the evidence tells us, that perhaps it's gone too far in the other direction at the moment. So we're really keen to understand from you all and through engagement like this what that appropriate balance is. And so that's really the kind of core of the questions, and perhaps we can come back to that a bit later. John says, to clarify the process and the question being asked, is the proposal to submit all 6 of the Levelling Up Fund or to prioritise some of them? And then once submitted, is there still flexibility to examine further and potentially adjust the detail of the implementation of these proposals? I can see that it looks like Catherine is typing an answer here. So the technicalities of the Levelling Up Fund is that there is a cap of what can be requested through that of £20 million for local projects. There's a higher cap of £50 million for projects which are either 90% transport or 90% culture. But the basis on which we've been looking at things so far is with this £20 million cap in mind. And it's fair to say that we would not be able to achieve everything that's in all 6 proposals with that £20 million. So there is a need, John, to prioritise some out of the 6. And in answer to your second question, once submitted, there is absolutely flexibility to examine further and adjust the detail of the implementation. We are doing some work to take forward the proposals in terms of the level of detail and resolution of them from what was included in the place plan, but there will still be a design process to go through on those. What we're trying to do is make sure that we've kind of captured all of the key issues, particularly in terms of deliverability. So can we actually deliver it for this budget in the way that we hope to? So that's what we're trying to sort of road test, I suppose, or give a good sense of at the moment. But yes, there will be a need to prioritise, and yes, there will be further development. Sally Ann here says that you thought that the Ship Street site was being looked at separately. Oh, sorry, it's moving around. Just as Debenhams Folker has been put as a separate project. So Ship Street is being looked at separately, but we see that there's absolutely a dynamic with these proposals. So it wouldn't be possible to include the whole of the Ship Street site for this. I mean, it will take more money than that and it will require partners. But we think that there's a complementarity between what's happening at Ship Street and the wider set of proposals. So it's certainly kind of within our thinking. And I think particularly things like that route through is worth thinking about how that complements the other ideas in the place plan. And then here, Laura Davison says, is the idea of park and ride still being looked at? So, I mean, it's unfair, isn't it? Because I think there was a trial of the park and ride, as I understand it, and that was ended without being considered a huge success. But it's a really difficult time, I think, to test these kinds of ideas, just because of the change in the way that people are using buses. And we understand that bus patronage is still significantly down from the numbers that were being supported prior to the pandemic. So it's not actively being looked at as part of our proposals, is the answer to that. But I don't think that there's anything that we're proposing here that would preclude that also being considered. I think with that, I'll move on to the next set of projects, because I'm aware that there's sort of questions in here that are relating to later sets of projects. So let's show you a little more of that. So project 3 is Sandgate Road and the town centre public realm. You'll have seen from the grand challenge that clearly addressing the challenges in the town centre is almost the kind of core of the sort of motivation of the place plan. And I think everybody that we've spoken to agrees that particularly this section of the town centre needs something. We need to do something about this. So included in the place plan were a set of proposals, and we are keen to hear from everybody about what would be the things that would make the biggest difference. And there's absolutely still sort of time and space to shape these. So moving actually more kind of geographically across rather than in order of priority, but included in the place plan were proposals to look at the sort of rear and sides of the shop units. We understand that this is privately owned, but nonetheless it's part of the town centre experience. And that number 2, to potentially improve pedestrian routes through some of these back streets. Number 3, and this is something that has come up again and again really, is the idea of introducing more greenery to Sandgate Road, particularly that pedestrianised area. And that could again include rain gardens and planting. At number 4, obviously Folker is something that the council are taking forward, and I can see from the Q&A that people are aware of that. So that kind of feeds into our thinking about what could be happening in the future here. In terms of Guildhall Street at number 5, we've heard aspirations for an improved market offer here and various sort of practical considerations about how difficult it is to run markets or events, and that's something that could be supported through redesigned public realm there. At number 6, in the place plan, we'd included this proposal, which we described as a town lab, which doesn't mean test tubes and white coats in the town centre. It means thinking of ways to be more experimental in the ways in which the town centre is being used. So introducing new types of uses, perhaps introducing smaller and more flexible uses, introducing workspace potentially. We've also had some feedback in the public engagement event last week about more kind of charity focused or community and civic focused activity. We are really keen to think about where that could be appropriate, what kinds of buildings that might need, what kinds of space. So this is really an idea that's still being shaped. And what we'd included in the place plan was just a suggestion of these are some of the buildings that look either underused or vacant. And that's something that we're exploring in more detail at the moment. At number 7, we recognise that there's going to be probably more skateboarders around in Folkestone than there have been, and that they might be attracted to the town centre. So a suggestion here that maybe similarly to the tactic that's been taken at the Harbour Arm to designing a dedicated facilities for skateboarding that's separate to where people might be kind of walking around, or maybe more vulnerable people, older people, younger children might be walking around in the pedestrianised area of Sandgate Road. Maybe we need to think about designing separately for the two. So that's at number 7. At number 8, a suggestion for a market improvement programme, which I think would sit alongside proposals for Guildhall Street. The town hall building, the sort of presence of that into the town centre, understanding what's going on in there, the tourist information, the silver screen, for example. We've had several comments about perhaps that isn't doing the best that it could to really celebrate what's going on inside. So the idea that better signage and public realm design could help to support that, alongside what's been referred to as Guildhall Square by different people, but improved public realm immediately outside the town square, the town hall there. And then in terms of some ideas of what that could potentially include, so we're really interested in this project, which is called Everyone Every Day. It's a project in Barking, which is as much an engagement programme as it is about use of space. But what's interesting here is that they've used an empty shop unit as a focus for that engagement. So I suppose it's a bit like the urban room in that sense, but maybe there's more of that kind of activity that could be happening in the town centre. Introducing greening and greenery, this is in Vauxhall, but you can see how that can sit alongside kind of generous public realm for pedestrians. The potential introduction of workspace into buildings that are underused at the moment, for example. And then this is an example of an existing building where some quite bold signage, in fact, has been put onto the outside of it to celebrate what's inside. We're not saying necessarily that's how we design at the town hall, but it's, I mean, thinking about how you can manifest what's happening inside better on the outside. And then in terms of what we've been told before, a bit of a similar pattern to the Bouverie Square proposals. So the majority here agreeing with the proposals and a lesser representation of disagreeing, but still a bit mixed. And then project number 4, the area around F51 and Payers Park, and I can see that there's some interest on the call from that. So just to run through the proposals that were included in the place plan and we're kind of evolving at the moment. So first of all, redesigning the road network to reintroduce two-way working and to accommodate better all modes of transport. That would allow closure of the top arm here of Dover Road so that rather than F51 being in a kind of traffic roundabout, that it's connected to the surroundings and in a more positive public realm environment. We've noticed the kind of reference to the Pent stream, which I think is culverted, so perhaps there's something in the public realm design that could be picking up on that. It doesn't mean deculverting necessarily, but some reference to the fact that we know that there's a stream that runs underneath here. At number 4, looking at the wider parking provision, and I should say just really clearly that there's a separate parking study that the council have commissioned that is looking at the occupancy and capacity of parking across the town, thinking about how that operates now in terms of what's required and how that operates in the future with anticipated future demand. So that is being given a dedicated study, and we understand that that's incredibly important to the people of Folkestone and to its businesses. A hub of potential uses around Payers Park, and it's interesting that Creative Folkestone are also thinking about potentially a new learning space for visual and creative arts here, as well as the potential for creating a pedestrian friendly space at Mill Bay as an important link between F51 and the old High Street area. So these are all proposals either that were in the place plan that are developing as we move forward, or that partners such as Creative Folkestone are thinking about. And we think that the implication here would be just fantastic connectivity to this new asset that you have, but also better connecting to the areas around Payers Park. And I know that there's at least somebody on the call who's really interested in this, so I think it would be interesting to hear from you more directly. Again, just some images of what that could potentially include. So thinking about new uses around the park, about more positive bits of public realm, I think on areas like the area outside F51, for example, and perhaps thinking about how skate furniture can be integrated into the design of those spaces. And then again, what we've been told before, I think here, again, slightly stronger weighting towards the strongly agree, with a much lower representation at disagreeing. So it seems that this set of proposals has support, and we're interested to hear again from you all on the call. Oh, so that's project 5. So I will stop there and come back to the Q&A. So Roger Joy says, in order to create a destination, has creating a covered area in front of Folker so that all year, all weather use can be envisaged. I think this is a really interesting point. It hasn't come up in relation to the area in front of Folker, but it has come up in relation to closer to the town hall and Guildhall Street. So, so yes, the idea of creating covered areas has come up. We recognise, though, that there are some challenges in terms of facilitating vehicle movement in the town centre, albeit that that's in restricted hours. But that is factoring into where there might be permanent structures. So I think the idea that that could be introduced as part of the proposals is on the table, and exactly where that sits would be interesting to talk about. Laura Davidson has asked whether there'll be a separate consultation on the future of Folker. I will refer that to, I'm not sure if it would be Ewan or somebody else at the council, I think, to answer that. If I can come back to you to answer that in a minute, hopefully that's okay. Richard Wallace says, a fair-sized group view in Go Folkestone favoured bus station being partly retained with a large lay-by supplemented by Shellens. We like the playground, but a lot of landscaping is necessary, ugly at the moment. Could a hotel come into Saga? Parking is always underestimated, we feel, and demand for cycling wishfully overestimated. But most of the station changes are good because the block between it, a centre and the centre, I think, is a big problem. So really look at landscaping and include a large lay-by at the north of Bowbury Square to smoothly run through the buses. So I think it's fair to say that, well, first of all, as I mentioned, parking is being looked at with a dedicated study. So I think we need the evidence from that. We also know that a huge number of journeys are being taken kind of less than 5-minute journeys by car. So those could potentially be walked or cycled. And it's important to make sure that we have the infrastructure to support that. But the detailed design of how exactly Bowbury Square could be reconfigured to include buses and to include some area of public space is being worked through at the moment. So we have lots and lots of different options. And I think it's really interesting to hear that perhaps there's, or from your point of view, a kind of halfway point in between these. I think that is a really interesting point. I'm wondering though, because Gillian White, I think, put in some queries around Payers Park in the previous chat, which I can just see in the answered questions box. I wonder, Gillian, if you'd be willing to just talk to us a little bit more, if we were able to unmute you. I'm going to ask Will to do that, to hear from you directly around your questions around Payers Park. Can that be facilitated?
Yes.
Oh, great. We can hear you.
Yes. My flat directly looks over the whole of the park. We were all very excited when it was refurbished because we thought all these things were going to happen, and they didn't. And my concern has always been it is still a hidden spot. We have the occasional police car drive round, but that's it. And it the one thing it was used for at the beginning was football, actually. Anyway, it's considerably improved now, and I just hope that all those plans that were originally in the planning application can now be realised. I think there wasn't enough money to do it in, for 2014. So I hope money will be forthcoming for, outdoor classrooms, things like that, because the little children don't use it at all. And there's lots of people living around the park who have children and no green space. So I feel it's a wasted space at the moment. And one other thing, very few properties actually back onto the park, only Space Gallery, and then the nook off Tontine Street. So I don't see how shops on the old High Street can link with the park. Well, there is the entranceway. That's my comments.
Thanks very much. I think it is a really interesting point, and actually hasn't come up quite this clearly, the support for the preceding set of proposals. We're really interested to keep on talking with creative folks and about their ideas for the park, because obviously they have a lot of
yes. But
so
they were involved in the beginning, and I hope that they will continue with the ideas that they originally had. They're not new ideas, but I just feel that there's so many I've got lots of people around me now who've got babies and kids, young children, and they will need space. I'm lucky I have outdoor space, but not many flats do around here. So being a mother with very, very old children, I'm always passionate about something for the young children, even pre-5-year-olds. So yeah, that's it.
No, well, that's great. And I think it actually corresponds with some of the, not specifically around Payers Park, but corresponds with some of the other questions and comments in here. So
yes,
in terms of children's play areas in central Folkestone as well. And John has put an interesting point about playgrounds integrated into the rest of the built environment in Bilbao, which we'll go away and have a look at. We're keen on that. Brian has a helpful suggestion of an Anish Kapoor sculpture in the plaza, on the plaza. I don't know if you were also at our public event last week, Brian, but somebody else made exactly the same suggestion. So it's either you or there's two people who are Anish Kapoor fans in Folkestone. So Daniel Keeling says the decision can't be made on such a small number of respondents. One family could swing the whole bias. Another survey could be conducted. And there is another survey that's live. So just to reassure you that absolutely is live. And I think also to reflect that there's a lot of work that's going on the kind of technical side of things. How can these projects realistically be delivered? That is also feeding into this decision-making process. So we don't see this as the end of it, but we do think it's really important to gain the views of local people and understand your kind of queries, concerns, hopes and aspirations as we're taking the projects forward. So absolutely, things are not being decided on the basis of these surveys, but we do think it's helpful to I guess use that as taking the temperature, and this is why we're kind of reiterating.
Can I just ask, I've just remembered one more question. Will we be able to still park in Lower Payers Park? The car, the car park there behind the Quarterhouse? Because there was some mention on your plan about unused space or something. But so many people have to park. I don't own a car because of where I live. But so many people now come here to work, and that car park below my flat is full every single day. It's alongside the Quarterhouse.
Yeah.
So am I wrong in thinking that there was something on the map about getting, putting a few trees there or something? I'm not sure.
So ourselves and Creative Folkestone are looking at all of those spaces around the park and thinking about how they might be best used. But as I said, there is a separate parking study that's looking at this in more detail. So we are not set on any particular proposal or another at the moment, and we're interested if that's one that you see every day as being really well used, then that's really useful feedback for us, and maybe it makes us think that we look elsewhere. We're certainly not trying to remove all parking everywhere that we see it, but we sense that there may be some capacity for loss of some parking in some spaces, but equally I'm sure F51 and the businesses, not F51, Creative Folkestone, I've got the questions in front of me, that Creative Folkestone will not be wanting to undermine their tenants and the activity of their businesses. So no particular proposals at the moment on that. I think with that, we can still come back and gather more questions, but we'll just keep moving on because I think we're talking about a wider set of proposals as well. So just move on to the final pair. So the Harbour Line and Tram Road. Again, this was included in the place plan and is something that we've been continuing to talk about. I think it's fair to say that there's divided opinions on this. So in terms of public realm upgrades, a proposal here that has come forward is just that the Tram Road car park, whilst we know that it's an important one and is well used, is at such a focal point for Folkestone and in such a kind of high priority spot that perhaps there's an opportunity to relocate that parking into an alternative provision. We made a suggestion for where that could be, but it could also be elsewhere, to turn the Tram Road car park into a public space that again kind of celebrates Folkestone and is an opportunity to enjoy the town rather than just being a car park. This would involve reconsidering the layout of the public space and thinking about how pedestrian routes kind of come through and across the area and the potential for events to be taking place here. At number 3, that would free up some space for a potential, we've suggested a mixed use development that could include commercial or cultural uses on the ground floor. And as I said, there would be a corresponding sort of reprovision of any lost parking from Tram Road car park. And there was a suggestion that it could be on this site, although, as I said, that could be elsewhere. And then at number 5, I think I would be surprised if most people in Folkestone aren't already familiar with proposals for the Harbour Line or the Remembrance Line, to include potentially here a shared cycleway, walkway, seating, maybe play features, and interpretation boards relating to the history of the train line there. So we see that still as a really great opportunity and something that we know a lot of people are very enthusiastic about. So in terms of examples of the kinds of things that could include, the obvious one to go to, particularly if we're talking about an old train line, is the New York High Line, but there are other examples of similar bits of landscaping that have a sort of linear or rail related themes, but we also are quite interested in the idea of highlighting the heritage of the area, and perhaps that's something that local creatives or artists could be involved with, as well as the redesign of the junction that we know the Tram Road junction is particularly challenging, for example, and that's come up again and again. So there would be an opportunity to look at that here, so that this space is something that really celebrates Folkestone and the harbour area. And then in terms of what we've been told before, again, definitely awaiting towards agreement from the responses that we had on the survey, but I can see that in the Q&A there's queries around the numbers, and we completely agree with you, which is why we're continuing to run surveys and to run this engagement process. And then finally, Sunny Sands. One of the things that we heard repeatedly through the place plan process was how important Sunny Sands is as a local asset, something that's used by the people of Folkestone, maybe slightly less so tourists, and that is really meaningful, particularly for the communities of East Folkestone. So the proposals here include improved facilities for water sports, including a changing places toilet, which could be accommodated within either a new building or refurbished buildings at this point, potentially a new slipway included with that as well. Introducing a new kiosk facility at the pump house building, which we know that exists, and I think that's already been put on the market, but that could be celebrated, and refurbishment of the toilets in this location. And then a suggestion that was in the place plan was a feasibility for a tidal pool here. So again, just supporting that kind of sports and leisure aspect of what goes on in Folkestone, not forgetting that this is one of your greatest assets, actually, the coastline, and thinking about how that can be used as a sort of draw for tourists and leisure, but also to support health and well-being in the populations of Folkestone. And just some ideas of what that could be. This is some examples from Chicago, which we think are quite nice. And I know that sort of smaller shed type structures are probably more appropriate along the harbour. So maybe there's something along those lines that could be implemented. Facilities that support water sports. So this is a kayaking club in France. And then I think we know what a tidal pool looks like, but just could be something that's quite exciting, I think. And then in terms of what we heard before, a similar pattern, I think, to the Harbour Line and Tram Road area. So I think at this point, I will just pause again for any queries. Then what I'd like to do is talk through next steps, and then perhaps we can come back to any general questions. So let me have a look in our questions box. So I will start at the top of my question. So Roger Joyce says a Calatrava style pedestrian bridge linking Guildhall Street north to south would be a showstopper. And Brian's concerned about the cost. I think maybe that seems like a fair response. I think what is interesting to us is that actually it seems that it could be possible, and it would obviously require some investment in the highways network, but it could be possible to have what we would call an at-grade crossing, so crossing at the road level rather than having to go over a bridge. Because I think Brian might be right about the cost of a Calatrava style pedestrian bridge, but also that it's such a short distance that it's no reason that we shouldn't be able to do that at the level of the road rather than over a huge bridge, notwithstanding that there's some figuring out of the highways network to be done there. Brian also suggests that the rooftops could be used for solar energy to power lighting and change the mood and atmosphere of the town centre. I think these kinds of suggestions are really interesting because questions of feeling safe and how to light town centres, I think, are incredibly important. And the idea that that could be done through sustainable means and energy that's generated within the town centre, I think is a really interesting one. So thank you for that, Brian. Mark Harain, ludicrous proposal. The steepest gradient railway in the country should be a cycle path. The obvious answer is to have a tram going up to the space at the top of Tram Road as a much needed park and ride with the loss of 500 spaces eventually on the harbour arm. It's saddening that the council chose to buy contaminated gasworks over this land. Remembrance Line do not support a cycleway. Well, thank you, Mark, for that. I think that's interesting to hear from you. I think as far as I understand it, the intention is still that the council are progressing acquiring this land. So I think that that's still a work in progress. And obviously there's kind of technicalities around the structure that are being worked through, but I don't think it's a choice of one or the other. Annette says that she loves the harbour line, walking, seating art. Yes, I think it's, yeah. Thank you very much for that. Okay, Richard, I think your point here about the kind of dynamic between the harbour arm and the rest of the town centre is a really interesting one, and definitely one that comes up quite often. So I wonder if, Richard, you'd be interested in talking to us a little bit more about that and what could be done to connect it. Will, if you can do the necessary, and Richard Wallace, we could hear from you, please.
Okay, well, I think it's very widely held that the harbour arm's fantastic, and a lot of the development down there is fantastic. But how do you get those people up to the town centre? It's very difficult, and some of it is possibly insuperable. But you certainly need to improve vertical connections, which means things like the lift, and possibly a considerable improvement to the stairs between the two levels. But probably the best thing to do is to try and look at the area between the harbour arm and the old high street and make it as attractive as possible. Tontine Street's still got some room for improvement, particularly in that pretty horrible area at the car park end, and one wonders if something more could be done there, so that people could simply be tempted to go up to the town centre or down from the town centre. A lot of shopkeepers in the town centre do say that that they're losing trade to down there, and that people aren't coming up. So we've got to really encourage the links in whatever way we can.
Thanks, Richard. I think this is the recurring challenge to us and in front of us all, really. I think the observation is absolutely accurate. And I suppose we're keen both to think about the connections between these two places, but also about what is the offer when you get into the sort of Sandgate Road bit of the town centre. Talk about the pedestrianised section of Sandgate Road. What is it that draws you up there, that is exciting to go to and interesting to go to, and things like play space or a better kind of family-friendly environment. There's a question in the chat about, for example, changing places toilets, and Laura, you're right that was raised in a previous webinar, and we're really interested in exploring where that could be accommodated within town centre itself, as well as at the in Sunny Sands or along the Stade. So I think the whole dynamic needs to be that both places are positive environments to be, as well as the connections in between them being well considered and well designed. And absolutely that sort of joining together of this town of two hearts, which we've heard about again and again, is a really interesting point. Paul Hudson says that the Levelling Up prospectus has assessment criteria around governance of projects and how they can demonstrate spend from this financial year onwards, which organisation would actually be responsible for delivering each of these projects, and most of them still seem to be at an early stage of preparation. What's your view about the credibility of these actual proposals for submission? So we have been involved in successful submissions to the Levelling Up Fund, to the Towns Fund, to the Future High Streets Fund, and my feeling is that actually Folkestone is in some ways quite far ahead of some of those other submissions, in that the place plan already exists and there's a strategic direction. We've been talking to various partners. I think it's fair to say actually that each of the project proposals has a set of partners that relates to them and that are supportive of the principles of what's included in the place plan, and that we're working through the detail of things like the bus station, for example, about exactly how that would be delivered. But I think that they're all at a stage of development that is credible for submission, and that every bit of time that we spend to get them closer and closer to delivery is a positive thing for the submission. So we're very much aware of those the spend requirements and the deliverability requirements, and that's exactly why we're doing this piece of work at the moment. And then Brian says, what direction of travel does We Made That have with regard to the projects which are realisable within the time constraints of any funding and which might be awarded? And will any of the £20 million bid be spent elsewhere? So I think the direction of travel is a really interesting question. We've been looking at lots of different ways of prioritising or thinking about the balance between these projects. And you can talk to the stakeholders around any individual one of these 6 and be completely convinced that it's absolutely the right thing to do. So it's genuinely an open question at the moment, where we're weighing up the quite a complicated set of requirements and considerations in terms of what's selected for the Levelling Up Fund bid. And it's genuinely, as I said, genuinely an open question at the moment. In terms of whether that's everything that's being considered, I think there's council activity, and I've mentioned the relationship with things that the council are doing at Ship Street, for example, that we have to be thinking about the whole picture of what's happening within Folkestone at the moment, I think, when we're bringing these projects forward. And so that we are doing that, because it's, I think, the right thing to do, to be thinking about the, as I said, the bigger picture. But direction of travel, I think, is being led by consideration of a whole range of factors, which includes deliverability in relation to the earlier comments, includes what the funding can realistically cover, includes whether we think that there's significant risk in delivery, as well as how well these projects are aligned strategically with the Levelling Up Fund, as well as how well they're aligned strategically with things like the corporate plan of the council. So are we contributing to the council delivering what they say that they should be delivering? And that's exactly the process that we're working through now. What I would say is that the online survey is a really helpful way of giving us your individual priorities, and that, I think, will absolutely feed in to that selection process. So what I should do now is just run us through the next milestones of what we're going to be doing, and then also what you and other stakeholders and interested parties can do to contribute. So we will be developing the proposals that you've seen this evening based on the feedback that we have received and continue to receive. We will be developing business cases and input for the Levelling Up Fund application when the sort of package of projects for the Levelling Up Fund is agreed. We'll be undertaking further public engagement on those projects for submission in May, and then developing those up in more detail. And the submission is the 6th of July. So that's our sort of onwards process from here. And then in terms of ongoing and upcoming public engagement, we will be making sure that this video and the content of the slides is all available online, and that we have some frequently asked questions available there. I've also mentioned this online survey, and we'll make sure that the links go into the chat. I think, yep, that's been taken care of. Thanks, team. So that you can click directly on those links, either to look at the information on the website or also to answer the survey. And that will allow you to give your own personal prioritization between the projects, and as well as any other additional feedback. And as I've mentioned, this further public engagement in May. So that's the kind of process going forward from here. What I would like to do is just spend the last bit of time that we have just making sure that we are answering questions, and maybe giving a few more opportunities for direct feedback. So we have a few comments here from Daniel Keeling. Daniel, would you want to run us through? There's a few of them. I don't know if you want to pick your favorite question.
Yes, I think the tidal pool is an interesting proposal, and I was wondering whether that was in the right place. I would have thought in front of the Lower Lees Coastal Park might be a better position for that, but that's one issue. The major issue I've got is the vertical connectivity, which Richard Wallace has also mentioned, and getting access into the harbour arm and the Roger de Haan development on the seafront, getting traffic down there it becomes very congested very easily. Tram road gets jammed up, and none of the proposals actually improve that problem. So I think that is a real challenge, and it really needs addressing overall. Once again, you know, parking is an issue. So there's a fair number of issues there around that subject of getting between the town and the harbour.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and we're encouraged to see that the Lees Lift proposals are going through to the next stage of their Heritage Lottery Fund submission, I think. So although I understand that that is a fairly niche way, I guess, of vertical connection, nonetheless, I think it will be an improvement.
Okay.
It's an interesting point, I think, or the couple of points. I think what we have been trying to do is to balance which of these things would have the biggest impact in terms of the challenge that we see in the town centre, and the biggest impact for particularly some of the communities of Folkestone who perhaps haven't had the access to opportunity that they might have had, or making the biggest difference to those communities in East Folkestone as well, where there are challenges with deprivation. And these issues that you mentioned are included in the place plan, but it's true that they're not currently included within this set of 6 projects. At some point we have to say we want to do 20 things, but right now we're going to do 3 actually is the limit in the Levelling Up Fund. That doesn't mean that we only choose 3 of these 6 projects. We can kind of package them together, I think, depending on how the funding works out. But there is a need for prioritisation, and it's interesting to hear that actually perhaps for you, your priorities lie completely elsewhere than these 6 projects. So I think we can just say thank you for that feedback, and that it doesn't mean because it's not included in this submission, this is not the end of change in Folkestone, and that hopefully the place plan still captures those aspirations, and that there's opportunities for future work to take those things forward. So I think just keep telling us, we'll keep making sure that that's recorded as part of the engagement process, and that maybe there'll be future opportunities to address some of these other issues. Let's see what other questions that we have. Thank you for that. We have a little section of conversation about how about a free bus circling the whole of Folkestone when all these projects are up and running. Interesting, I think, Cynthia. And Laura Davison says that Southampton has one of these. And Annette says, yes, a bus service that actually goes from the train station down to the harbour and around the places that people actually live. This has come up quite a lot, actually, the routing of buses, and how that could be better than it is now. And I think it's a really fair comment, and quite challenging, I think. I mean, out with the council's direct control, obviously. I suppose the only thing to reflect on that, again, similarly to previously, I think the more that we're demonstrating demand and kind of feedback along these lines back to partners, that's a really helpful process. But just to reflect what a challenging situation the buses are in at the moment in terms of their patronage. So I think anything about a free bus is quite difficult to deliver, and, you know, just being completely frank about that, and that I think will continue to be a difficult situation. So yeah, I absolutely see that. Perhaps a bus service that goes from the train station down to the harbour, rather than a free bus. Not trying to be too cynical, Cynthia. Perhaps that's something that could be progressed, and I don't know what the status of any conversations around that might be. I am mindful, Ewan, that there was a question earlier around engagement around Folka, and I know that this isn't a webinar around Folka, but just in terms of signposting people to maybe future activity, if that might be one that you wanted to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. And I did put an answer in the live chat actually about that, just saying that, you know, as plans evolve for Folka over the coming months, we'll be considering, you know, what type of engagement we might need as we bring plans forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I too many different boxes with different bits of chat and questions in for me to keep track of that. I just didn't realize that you'd answered it already, but thank you, that's helpful. I think, I mean, what I can do is say to you all, oh, this is interesting. Sally Ann Curd has a comment around violence against women in the Girls campaign led to the police to liaise with town centres and business owners to help make spaces safe at night. Have we spoken to the Community Safety Partnership and the local police? So my understanding is that they've been invited to some of our workshops, but I would have to check if they've actually attended. I think it's a really interesting point, and for obvious reasons, something that I'm especially interested in. So I think that's something that we should follow up, and it's a really helpful prompt. Thank you, Sally Ann. So what I would like to suggest, I think we've heard from most people who have ongoing kind of comments and questions in the chat, so I think that is really helpful. What I can do is say that we'll absolutely be recording all of those questions, and we'll try and make sure that those go as FAQs onto the website. But I think we're probably in danger a little bit of going over ground that has probably been covered elsewhere. So what I would like to do is just thank everybody for attending this evening, to encourage you to please respond to the survey, that would be great, and to remind you that we'll be putting the recording available online for those who weren't able to attend this evening. So unless there's any immediate burning questions, I think we can wrap up a little bit early. Thank you everyone for your evenings.